All right, and with you, Susan Kinney.
So, shall I start? Is now a good time? Yeah? Okay. Right. Well, welcome everyone. It's lovely to see you here. And this is part of a little series that, thanks to the very supportive nature of the Q team, we've been able to participate in. It's in relation to the book Appreciating Health and Care. And we're very delighted that Rachel Arnold and Claire Gorton, their work contributed both to this and to the ebook, the supplement which we have. So I'm sure they'll tell you more about all the things they've done. But basically, when I first found their article in 2022, I just carried it around with me to every training I took, waving it at people, because I felt it was so good. You know, it was so lovely in the fact that they brought in the principles, they were doing meta observation of what was happening as well as the research. Yeah, it just so excited me. And actually, I wanted to take a moment just to also mention this book, because this book by Jan Reid, I found, early on in my Appreciative Inquiry journey, and it was really significant. And she's no longer with us. She died quite early, actually, in 2016. But I feel it's nice to bring her in here because she did Appreciative Inquiry research in the NHS. So that also, finding her book gave me a real lift to do more of this work. So this is also the first meeting of our Appreciative Inquiry SIG, Special Interest Group, which was set up by Kaylee Barnett with the support of Uriam and Matthew. So we're also looking forward to seeing how this SIG emerges. So without more ado, let's hand over to Rachel and Claire. And if there's any other housekeeping, Uriam, you can put it in the chat or something if I've forgotten anything. Okay. You're waving, thank you. Good, okay. So over to you two.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. My name's Claire Gordon. I'm a consultant nurse in stroke at Lancs Teaching Hospital up in Preston in the Northwest, and also a senior research fellow at the University of Central Lancashire. And I'll just let Rachel introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Rachel Arnold. I'm a visiting fellow at Bournemouth University and a former nurse midwife.
Thank you. So we're going to talk to you today about our two projects using Appreciative Inquiry. And I think what we wanted to start off with is to say that Rachel and I are not AI experts. This is just to share our experiences of using it in our projects. And what I'd like to do is, firstly, we're going to do just a couple of slides on Appreciative Inquiry and our perspective and interpretation of Appreciative Inquiry. And then we're going to go on and just talk about both our projects. So Rachel's going to start first and talk about her project looking at maternity staff wellbeing. And then I'll go on and talk about my stroke unit study looking at relationship centeredness. And then we're going to bring it together at the end and just discuss together some commonalities between the two studies. And then we've got some time at the end to then just open it up to everyone for questions and answers and a bit of discussion as well from the presentations. So to start with, Appreciative Inquiry, I'm sure most of you know this, but we just wanted to cover it just in case you weren't familiar with Appreciative Inquiry. It was originally developed by David Cooper-Ryder in about the early 2000s as an alternative organisational management approach. It's been extensively used in business and healthcare, but since then really expanded as well as a research method, and that tends to be under the umbrella of action research. The nice thing about Appreciative Inquiry is that it's an assets-based approach. It rejects the traditional problem-orientated approach to change, and it has a positive strength-based approach where the focus is on what is working well, recognising and valuing this, and then trying to enhance it further. The traditional Appreciative Inquiry model tends to have 4 stages. This has been adapted over time, but I'm going for the original model that Rachel and I tended to use. And it's a cyclical model, so it's constantly going around And it tends to start with discovery, so really exploring what's working well in your situation, and then envision or a vision stage with exploring with others about what would be the ideal. If there was no resources barred, what would you really want to see? What would be the perfect situation here? And then moving on to a co-creation phase where we're working together to try and understand what we need to do to create that ideal, trying things out, evaluating them, trying them, but really having a collaborative effort to design and test out change. And then the final bit is the destiny or the embedding or the sustaining phase, which is really looking at how can we support people to continue these developments and help it to continue to grow. The principles that we used while doing these appreciative inquiry projects is probably where the most power and the most magic came from. We held the 4D cycle loosely, as in we didn't follow it as a recipe book. And I thought that was a really important thing to say right from the outset, that appreciative inquiry is a dynamic living process. And I think if you try and follow that 4D cycle too closely, you lose some of that magic that can happen and grow out of the conversations. It's inclusive and it's cooperative. It's holding different perspectives and multiple perspectives about the same thing. And really, we went in there as researchers, but it was very much their projects. That we co-created it together, and that was also really important. We've put words create worlds, and that's very much around how the organisation stories and what the people talk about within the organisation is what people value the most, and those words are really powerful. And within that then, if we use appreciative stories and appreciative conversations, it's a bit provocative. It's particularly in the NHS, that's an unusual thing to do, and it tends to shift the status quo a little bit. We needed to trust the process. We were both novices in this, weren't we? And we went in there and we were really just, let's give it a go. We've got the principles here, let's see if it works. And I think the final thing that we wanted to say, and we really reflected this on the beginning of both of our projects, was it's not being slavishly positive. We need to be genuine and authentic, and that also means acknowledging and hearing those challenges and problems that people have in clinical practice and not just ignoring them because we only want to focus on the positive. So we have two stories to tell. Firstly, Rachel's going to talk about her maternity service and enhancing staff wellbeing, and then I'm going to go second and talk about my stroke unit project that was looking to understand what are the valued relationships on stroke units and how those could be nurtured further. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Claire. So I'd never heard of Appreciative Inquiry when I started my job at Bournemouth University. The university had some money to look at a local maternity unit, and fairly early on, we decided that staff wellbeing was an important thing that I would focus on. Because I'd worked out of the NHS for several decades, I decided that I really needed a period of orientation in the unit to build relationships, to really understand what's the NHS like these days. I knew that it was going to, have changed a lot since I worked there. And it was during that phase that I was chatting to the head of maternity and giving her a little bit of feedback on what I'd found over the first few weeks. And I happened to quote a few things that people had said, and they were slightly negative quotes about how tough things were. And it was strange because I could almost see her visibly. She just looked a little bit crushed. And I suddenly realized the more we talked, she was very positive about the research, and she was like, no, it's fine. Whatever you find, I want to hear about it, and you must, write it up. But I realized how passionately people care and also how easily they're crushed. And that started me on a journey of thinking maybe rather than just doing interviews, finding a problem, delving deep, looking for some brilliant solution, recommendations that I can make, maybe that's not really the approach. And over the space of a few weeks, 2 people independently mentioned appreciative inquiry. And I ended up doing a course on appreciative inquiry. I found that Claire was using it. Well, she was finishing her PhD at that point at Bournemouth. And I decided that this was the method that I would use. So, Claire, yes. So what did I do? To start with, it was important to build those relationships. I was the outsider. And of course, people wonder what you're there, what you're doing. And it was also important to work with people to say, I'm thinking about doing staff wellbeing. What do you think? So from the beginning, I was trying to co-create and also listening to the head of maternity. What did she think would work? How would we design this? How would this fit into a really busy service? Of course, the project was conceived in 2019. By the time I was ready to start, of course, we were going into lockdown. So that again needed adapting. Of course, clinical needs had to come first. And as I started, we were facing staff shortages, sickness, staff working extra shifts. And it required a lot of flexibility, as any of you who have tried to do research in the NHS or to instigate some program understand. Sometimes I would go to the ward and I'd take one look and think, no, not at the moment. And I'd chat to the coordinator and they'd say, come back later. Sometimes I'd go 3 times to the hospital and not manage one interview. Another time I went in an evening. It happened to be quiet. I got 5 interviews and I could have done more, but I was running out of the energy to really listen properly. And it was about using every opportunity. So one day I walked into the doctor's office and there happened to be 5 doctors in there. And I was going in just to talk about the study with them, just an initial hello, this is me. And one of the doctors said, well, we could do it now. So I didn't have my digital recorder. I didn't have my questions. I felt totally unprepared. But when do you ever get 5 doctors with nothing to do? So it was being prepared to just seize that moment, even if it was going to be unprepared and imperfect. Thank you, Claire. So really, it was about creating spaces for stories and really digging down to meaning and aspirations. I did 39 interviews and I tried to do a broad range of staff, from student midwives to a consultant to experienced midwives, newly qualified, to really get a picture and to hear all of those different perspectives. We looked at the best of, or a shift that you went home buzzing. Tell me about that shift. What was happening? Why was it so special? We talked about what they valued, what was meaningful about their work. And it wasn't just about recounting an experience, but it was almost reliving it. It was asking them, well, how did it feel? It was probing and giving them time. And it wasn't simply about interviewing a group of staff. Because appreciative inquiry is based on social constructionism, as Claire's already said, it's about the words that we use, and it's about that actually can shape reality. So it was really important to draw other people in who I wasn't interviewing. So I used every method I could think of. They had a staff Facebook page, so someone persuaded me to do little videos as feedback. So I'd do a video on colleagues, the importance of colleagues, or feedback. If I get some feedback, it's really helpful. And I encouraged other people to agree, disagree, add their perspectives, or tell their stories. And some of those got quite a good response of other people being drawn in. There was a staff newsletter that went round that I put regular bulletins in. I spoke to the clinical governance and the staff meetings, and I'd do a tea round because I was doing staff wellbeing, and I was told that cups of tea, occasional chocolate and cake made a difference to wellbeing. So I took them seriously, and as we were having tea, I would just chat to them about their day. So I tried to keep that conversation going and draw other people in. This is just a quick overview. Really, we're not focusing on well-being, but I think it helps you to understand the different things that appreciative inquiry can draw out. So everything I need to do my job. Now, having enough staff on a shift was top, and that won't surprise anyone. But it was generally qualified by, actually, it's not just the numbers, it's who you're on with. There were many practical things that people needed, and it might be somebody telling me where to get a uniform when I start my job, someone making sure I've got a pass so I can get in. But it was also those psychological things. It was feeling that if I'm in the room and I press the emergency bell, people are going to come. Feeling like if I come to work and I'm just having a bad day and I've got brain fog, I can go and ask even a stupid question, but nobody will humiliate me or make me feel stupid. People talked about family, having a sense of being team, and that if I come into work and I'm a bit quiet, and someone notices and says, "Do you fancy a cup of tea?" Those small things were really important. Meaning was so important. Again, whether you were a care assistant, maternity support worker, or a consultant, it was the relationships, it was those connections with the women they were caring for, but also with their colleagues that really made a difference. And everyone needed to know that they were making a difference, however small, that somebody just said thank you. That really helped when you did that. People also, I think that the happiest people were the people who'd really found their niche. Now, that might be their work-life balance, that they were doing the hours and the type of shifts that suited them and their family commitments, but it was more than that. It was also the area of work. Now, it was an integrated service, and generally people worked everywhere, but there were also a few special areas. And for some people, they were like, it really fits my personality. It's what I'm in the job for. And if they felt that those things tied up, then they were really well and thriving. Learning and growing. A registrar said, if somebody shows me a new skill, I'm so happy. I'm so excited. There was that desire to learn and to grow, and also to pass on skills. An agency. People recognized they needed to take care of themselves. They needed to set boundaries sometimes and say, actually, I can't work any extra shifts on my holiday this year. I really need time away. And it was also having strategies to stay well, to switch off. Okay. Oh, and in the centre, I nearly forgot, sorry, Claire, there was also an important area about being able to manage our roles, responsibilities, and emotions. And this wasn't just work. This was, I'm a mum, I'm a daughter, and people needed to feel they weren't failing in any area, that somehow they were balancing all of those things, and that in work they were able to care to the standard that they aspired to. Okay, thank you. So what did we find? If I had to sum it up, I've got 3 slides. So one is meaning, passion, and commitment. I was stunned. If I'm honest, by the time I started the interviews in the middle of COVID, or the first year of COVID, I was like, can I really ask people about what gives you a buzz? Tell me about a great day, thinking, I don't know I can do this in this context. But it was me, I was stunned at the passion, the enthusiasm, the commitment. There was one midwife who had found things very difficult, and she said, well, it's the first time in my life that I thought about not coming to work. She said, I might have cried in the changing room, but I still came. And that was so typical of the attitude of staff. They told stories about the people that had inspired them and their aspirations. So that was the first thing, Claire. I used this slide and we talked about it quite a lot. You see, when I started the study, I looked at, my question was enhancing, how to enhance the well-being of maternity staff. And I wondered if I was being a bit naive, because I thought, well, we need to reorganize the NHS, we need more funding, big things that I could do nothing about. But actually, I realized that everyone had the power to make a difference to the colleague of their well-being. The well-being of their colleagues. So this is the Brownlee brothers. They're in the final. You probably know the story of the triathlon in Mexico. And one of the brothers, Alistair, was nearly at the finish line. He was in the lead. He was obviously exhausted and basically collapsing. His brother comes around the corner, sees what's happening, almost without thinking. He grabs his arm and he pulls him over the finish line. We talked about this. You know, it's about seeing someone struggling and it's about doing something. But it's not only about the Brownlee brothers. We thought about the people in the crowd. We thought about the people cheering, handing out drinks, family members, waving, shouting. I don't think it'll be much of an event without the crowd. You see, there are so many things we can't do anything about. We can't do anything about the acuity of the patients, the women that come to our services. We can't do anything about the length of the shift or the staff shortages, but there are things that everybody can do. We realize that those small things really make a huge difference. And it was Appreciative Inquiry that helped us to identify what those small things were. Thank you. The other picture that came to mind, I'm very visual, and I kept thinking about trapeze artists, because actually, I think what happens in the NHS, it's a superhuman feat. It's performed by human beings, and it's not just now and again, it's every day. And what I think about is, well, it's fine. You know, you've practiced, you're up there, it's amazing. But even they must get days when they're not feeling so great. You know, it's Monday morning, or perhaps someone's catching you and they're a new partner. Do you really trust them? Because I realize that what really matters is what's underneath. It's the safety net that matters. And as we talked about it together, we realised that in maternity services, I think in the NHS in general, that safety net is colleagues. It's people that you can ask when you've got brain fog, and you might have done it 100 times before, but just today you're not clear. It is about knowing that someone will come if you have an emergency. It's knowing that if the unthinkable should happen, that you've got colleagues who are going to support you. Thank you, Claire. So I just want to talk about the benefits and the impact of Appreciative Inquiry for individual staff, firstly. Staff found it really therapeutic. I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a therapist, but people went out of the room and said, I feel like I've had therapy. They put on the Facebook page, if you get the chance, do an interview with Rachel. And I think it was that safe space. It was a place where they weren't going to be criticised, where actually they could just go back to their dreams, their values, why they chose to work in this profession, what inspired them, and the things that really give them a buzz. And we talked about what you appreciate about yourself, and they really struggled with that, some of them. But then they came out with, for some of them, it's like their biggest achievement was they were still there. They hadn't given up. So they reconnected with all of that and they started to appreciate themselves. And I don't think people have that space. You know, they're busy mums, they're busy lives at home, It's high pressure from the minute you walk in at work. And it was that safe space. For some, it gave them new insights and direction. So one of the midwives talked passionately about a particular woman she'd assisted, she'd been with during childbirth, and why it had meant so much to her. And she talked, yeah, it was a great interview. But I thought that was it. And then I got an I got an email from her a few days later saying, I realized that actually I'm really passionate about this particular group of women. She'd been to see her manager and she said, I'd really like to specialize. How would I go about that? So just that stepping back and that time to appreciate herself, to look at the best that was happening in her life, helped her to have new insights and new direction. There was another midwife who had struggled. It was probably her story was probably the most challenging. And I let her talk, and then I said, okay, so in an ideal world, how would you have liked this to be? What could have been different? And so we explored that together. And again, totally out of the blue, a little bit later, I got an email from her saying, it was a difficult experience, but actually I've thought about it and now I realize that I can do something about it. Like I can be that person. She talked about the atmosphere and she realized that she didn't have to be the victim, that she could be part of the answer. So these were some of the individual benefits for staff. I want to just talk about the benefits that I saw for the institution. So for the maternity service itself, I think it changed conversations. And the head of midwifery, at some point, I brought in some chocolate and some cake. I think it's when I'd been away with one of the lockdowns, and she was like, "Oh, it's very nice, but it's not necessary," sort of thing. But actually, even small things like that, in the end, she said, I didn't realize how much it would mean to staff. You see, there were fantastic things happening anyway. But I think the situation is that it's happening every day. It's not remarkable. We don't talk about it. But Appreciative Inquiry, it highlighted it. It acknowledged that whether you were a consultant or a newly qualified midwife or a student, actually someone saying thank you, that really made a difference, was important. There was a doctor who said, she told a story about, I was walking down the corridor the other day and a midwife stopped me and said, oh, could I just have a word with you? She said, you did a review on a patient the other day. And it was really thorough. It was a great review. So thank you. And the doctor said to her colleagues, it was in the discussion group, and she said, I can't remember. I can't remember the last time anybody said something like that to me. She said it was really lovely. And I think we forget how vulnerable we are. We forget how we all thrive on those small things. And so we started talking about that together and saying, one of the midwives said, I said, what's a good day? And she said, well, there's enough staff, we get our breaks, maybe we have a nice delivery, and everybody says goodbye when we go home. And I thought, everybody says goodbye. But it meant there's a relationship. It meant it's that human thing, that connection. So what else? It engendered grassroots initiatives for enhancing staff well-being. Because people said, I think the doctors, they remembered that they used to get together every now and again for lunch times, and they just check in on each other. And they said, we haven't been doing that for a long time. Maybe we should start that again. The day room, people talked about the fact that it wasn't very conducive to switching off, whether you had 5 minutes or half an hour break, because there were notices about things going wrong, and they wanted somewhere that they really could relax. And so a lot of work went into, they managed to get it refurbished. And management was super interested in how they could support staff well-being. So it gave them quite a lot of keys as to what made a difference. And finally, it strengthened interprofessional relationships. because people realized, actually, I wrote this, it strengthened interprofessional relationships and working because it showed that at the heart of the service were human beings who, regardless of their job title or seniority, thrive on kindness, feedback, friendliness, being included, being thanked, being able to ask a question without being made to feel stupid, and being part of a supportive team. And so they realized that whether you were a consultant, a senior midwife, or very, very junior, you needed each other, and that common humanity was important for the team functioning well in taking care of each other. So I want to pass over to Claire, but just to say, my experience of appreciative inquiry was that we need to tap into this potential, and yeah, I'm sure Claire will follow up on that.
Thank you, Rachel. I think my study segues very nicely onto that very last statement that Rachel was saying around relationships and recognizing a common humanity, which was more my focus. Instead of well-being, my study was a PhD study, but it was looking at relationship-centeredness on stroke units. And I purposefully didn't use the term relationship-centered care because firstly, stroke units tend to have dedicated multidisciplinary teams that are ward-based, and I feel like care sometimes is more synonymous with a nursing action rather than the whole team. So I wanted to make sure that it was more inclusive, and also care tends to focus on just the patient, whereas I feel relationship-centeredness involves all the staff relationships as well, which I'll draw into when I'm talking. So firstly, just to be clear about what relationship-centered is, I just wanted to clarify how it's different to person and patient-centeredness, which is sometimes what we're more familiar with. And there are a lot of overlap between them, which is on the right-hand column. There's that respect for individuality, uniqueness, having active listening and open communication, really empowering the patient to be able to make decisions for themselves. And it's a holistic approach as well, and also a cultural approach within the context of care. Relationship-centeredness tends to have been developed within the long-term conditions and chronic conditions field, where there is less of a curative element to healthcare and more about supporting a person living with a health condition throughout their life. And therefore the focus is more around reciprocity of relationships and reflecting on those relationships and how best it is to support that person living with a healthcare condition. So let me introduce you to the two wards I worked in. They were two specialist stroke units in two district general hospitals in the southwest of England. Both had about 25 inpatient beds and were a combination of acute and rehabilitation beds. They both had a day room, which was a nice common area where there was MDT meetings going on, patients and relatives could sit, and also sometimes therapy went on there. One had access to an outdoor space and also a dedicated therapy office on the ward, whereas the other ward people had to leave the ward in order to get those spaces. The aim of my study, because it was a PhD study and it was funded, I had to choose the topic choice in order to get the funding. In a way, that first principle where the team decide on what the topic is that they're going to explore, I wasn't able to do. But I gave that kind of general approach that I wanted to explore what were valued relationships on the stroke units and how could they be nurtured further. And the rest of it was really down to them and what they wanted to look at. So our approach as a team, and I've used the word our approach because it was very much a team effort, and it could have only worked and has been as successful as it was with everybody really engaging in it, and also doing their own appreciative inquiry alongside what I was doing. It felt like we did a long time in discovery. And I feel like for me, this was probably the most important and the most powerful aspect of appreciative inquiry. It was noticing, being curious and appreciating. And a bit like with what Rachel said, I had to spend a lot of time with the staff getting to know who I was. They were really worried about what I was there to see and observe. when I first started noticing things and I said, oh, could I talk to you about that? Immediately what comes to their mind is, what have I done wrong? And immediately they were a bit defensive. So it took a lot of time for them to understand that that's not what I was there for, and that was not what I was about. I also wanted to emphasize that I wasn't an expert. I really focused on the fact that I was a student, and I'd never used this approach before either. And actually, let's just try it together and give it a go. It all seems a bit alien within the healthcare setting, but let's just try these out together. And it didn't always work. And I remember after one focus group, with the therapist actually, we came out and I said, oh, how was that for everyone? And one therapist came up and said, it felt like we were in an Alcoholics Anonymous session, and I really don't ever want to do that again. Thank you very much. So, and that was fine. It was just lovely that they could say that. And it's like, oh, okay, right, we won't do that way again then. So it was wonderful. It was just a learning exercise for all of us. But the most important thing, and the thing that I really held close to me, was this thing about the type of questions I was going to ask and what I was curious about were going to be fateful. So they were going to be how the project progressed. And I spent a lot of time reflecting with my supervisors on how the best to do this. Intention is key. It's being genuine, it's being curious, and understanding that those questions you ask are never neutral. Like I said, I reflected with my supervisors. There was sometimes I'd come away and go, actually, today was really flat. I would have felt like I wasn't really getting anywhere. People weren't opening up and exploring with me. And other days they were really energized and I got some really great conversations going. And a lot of it was down to how did I pose that first question? How did I show that I was curious? And what was it that I initially asked for? So it's very much about trying to change the way that I phrased things personally so that they were positive questions that would create some energy and some dialogue. And when it went right, these are the kind of things that people would say to me. So the first one up at the top is a quote from a registered nurse who I'd just seen just briefly. She was by the sister's office, relative walks on the ward. They had a brief conversation and then it was immediately this massive big bear hug that they gave each other. And it was just, I was really touched by it, which is why I went over and once the interaction had finished and said, can you just help me understand? That looked lovely to me. How was it for you? What was it like? What did you value about that? Why did you feel like you could hug her? What was it that made that happen? And she said, I just felt it in here. It was part of her intuition. She felt it was the right thing to do. She'd also known her. She'd known the relative. She built up a relationship with her before. And she also mentioned the relationship. So it was important that we know that we care for them too, the relatives, as well as the patient. And that was why that hug was important for her to do. For the healthcare assistant, which is in the next bubble, that was when I was trying to get some of the healthcare, some of the rest of the staff on board with Appreciative Inquiry and noticing themselves. And I'd asked her to just that evening, just reflect on a couple of meaningful interactions she'd had with her patients that day, potentially write them down so that we could share them with other members of the team. And I came back on the ward the next day and she grabbed me as soon as I went on the ward and went, Claire, that was just amazing. She was saying, I felt really choked up writing them down. She remembered all the emotions, the way the patient reacts, how they were feeling. And she realized then that those actions of just doing her job, just going and helping somebody go to the toilet, have their breakfast, how important it was for them. And actually, when a patient says thank you, there's a lot of meaning behind that as well. And then the last one was an interview I had with a relative. It was a one-to-one interview. She was a tricky relative. In fact, the staff said to me, you want to do Appreciative Inquiry? Why don't you go and choose that relative over there? She's a bit of a nightmare. She's been moaning all the time. She complains all the time. Right, okay, I'm up for a bit of a challenge. And actually, it was a lovely, lovely interaction with her. She was really frustrated. Her husband had dementia. She was her main carer, and she wasn't able to control that care when he was on the ward with us. And we then, after a while, we were able to change the conversation around. There are times when she feels very secure with his care and she feels like he has really good care. And I said, well, what is it? What is it about those times that makes a difference? And she said, it's not what they do. It's not that they just go and run and get him a urine bottle when he needs it. It's just that they look at him and smile and just treat him normally. So they're not seeing him as a patient, they're seeing him as a human being. So how did I do all that? I think, like Rachel, I used a lot of one-to-one interviews. I spent a lot of time hanging about in the staff room or at the nurses' station, because that tended to be more neutral areas. But if I noticed something lovely, an interaction lovely going on in one of the patient bays, then I would wander in and have a listen and join in that conversation near the end. I was very mindful that I was only there for short periods of day, and I wanted to share those stories with other people. And so in a very crude way, I would write them all out and stick them on a board and have them there, so that there was opportunities for staff, patients and relatives to see them. It was in a public space where everyone had access to them, and they could potentially have some conversations around those positive experiences even when I wasn't there. In a lot of my one-to-one interviews, I used photo elicitation, which are the three pictures of an example at the bottom left there. And they were really to explore, again, they helped explore the meaning behind what was going on in the ward. And so, for example, if I chose the one in the middle with the welly boots, one of the therapy assistants chose that to describe playfulness on the stroke unit, and how one day she and another nurse had been to a yoga session the evening before, and they come in as stiff as a board that day. And they were in the bay, the female bay, and they were just chatting about this yoga session. And one of the older ladies didn't really know what yoga was. And so they were like, all right, then we'll show you. And they got down on the floor in the middle of the bay, and they were doing a bit of yoga together. And there was a lot of giggling then going around all the beds while they were watching this nurse and a therapy assistant on the floor trying to get into all these different yoga positions. And she said that's what it was all about. That's what our ward life should be like. It should be playful and fun. I also found these really powerful and a really helpful tool for appreciative inquiry. And it's called Emotional Touch Points. And this really nice resource has been developed by the University of West of Scotland and Belinda Dewar, who was one of my PhD supervisors. And on the left, the coloured pictures are different topics that you can choose. You have a load of cards with different topics on about the healthcare. And in this particular resource, they've grouped them into the green is for relatives, pinks for patients or clients, and the purple are for staff. So you can use it with different groups. I made up my own as well, so just have different topics there. And then there's a whole load of emotions for those topics, and the dark type ones are your negative emotions, and then the lighter type ones are your positive emotions. And so the patient or staff member or relative chooses a topic, and then you ask them to choose emotions that go with that topic. How does it make you feel? And it's just a fantastic way of really getting to some very meaningful stuff very quickly. And I also found it very helpful with our patient group. Often they have some type of communication impairment with their expressive ability to be able to talk. And I checked with speech and language therapists if their written understanding was okay. Then this was another lovely way to get them to be able to share their experiences. So as I said before, it felt like I was in the discovery phase for a long, long time. And it was then when I started to reflect that I probably wasn't actually. I was the whole 4D cycle, the whole appreciative inquiry cycle was happening all in that one moment. It's just that I really hadn't noticed. And these are some of the actions that came out of just those questioning and discovering. So like, for example, the first bullet point was after an interview with a relative of a patient on the ward who was actually unfortunately dying, he decided that after our conversation and his reflection on the positive things that was happening with his wife's care, that he wanted to write an open thank you letter there and then. He didn't want to wait until the patient had unfortunately died and he was no longer visiting the ward. He wanted to do it there and then. And we put it up in the staff room for everyone to see. I was talking to the ward sister about the power of appreciation, and she was going, well, I've got a staff meeting next week and I have to, because that's what we all do on our staff meetings, is go through all the complaints that we've had and the feedback. How am I going to do that? Because if I go in there and my staff are tired, they're overworked, and it's not what they need right now. And so we work together to flip those complaints into something positive. So what is it that the person's trying to say, and how can we say that in a positive way instead? And an example was the complaint about how long it took for call bells to be answered. And so we flipped it about how patients would potentially feel more secure and safe if when they answered the bell, it was done more quickly. So they weren't waiting for a long time, worrying about whether they were going to be incontinent, worrying about whether they're going to fall and they need some help and there's no one there. One of the nurses requested to stay on the stroke unit. So it was a discharge facilitator who was going to get rotated round to a different ward. And she asked her manager if she could stay on the stroke unit while the project was going on, because she found it so valuable and energizing for her. And she was really enjoying seeing what was happening. So yeah, those are some of the examples of how the action was happening. To start with, I just didn't even notice it was. I just thought I was still in the discovery phase. And this is what we found. So together we looked at all that information, and within focus groups and then checking it out with patients and relatives as well on a one-to-one basis, we came up with these 4 things as really important to facilitate relationship centeredness on the stroke unit. And it starts, so it grows, and I'll show you my fern in the next slide, but it grows. So the real foundations was around this human connectedness. They said that was the real important. That's what made the relationships meaningful. And then it was, how do you nurture that human connectedness so that everyone feels it's happening and it's there in their day-to-day work on the stroke unit? And this is where the appreciative inquiry came in. So appreciative inquiry sensitized the staff, the patients, the relatives more to those human connections. They were talking about how you no longer saw the person so much in their role as a physio, as a therapy assistant, as a nurse, as a patient or a relative. You saw them first as a human being that you wanted to connect with, and the rest came out of that. And that the appreciative inquiry helped with that reflection and helped staff to sensitize more to that human connectedness. Then it was really important that we moved on from that we talked about that we shared our stories about what was important about those human connections. And that brought an alternative conversation into the workspace, where previously the value and the conversations tended to focus on the work of the day. Often matrons would come on and congratulate staff for discharging patients or discharging them at 10 o'clock in the morning rather than 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because it was helping with all the pressures within the beds. Whereas actually talking also alongside that about the importance of human connections and the relationships that were going on increased the value of that within the team. Once that value was there and staff were talking about it more, and they again had a sense that they were all buying into the same thing, we were all valuing it, they then felt they could be a bit creative with their relationships and had a freedom to make more of those connections and to act like that more of the time within their wards. And I just love that last quote about the Irish song on the bottom right. And that was a registered nurse who was with a patient with low levels of consciousness, and the patient really hadn't woken up after her stroke at all. And she'd gone in there to start giving her care in the morning, and we didn't know very much about the patient at all. And the nurse started to sing an Irish song, and we didn't even know that she had an Irish background. And then it was then that the patient just started to join in and carry on. And it was lovely because then the rest of the team heard this patient singing and the two of them singing together, and they all came around the door of the side room and started to listen in and join in with that moment as well. And it was just really lovely, really, really lovely to see.
5, Claire.
Thank you. So this is the fern that I was talking about. And I feel like with relationship centeredness, with appreciative inquiry, it unfurls over time, and it really starts with that importance of recognizing the value of human connections as the roots, I suppose, of the fern. It needs to be nurtured, and if you don't nurture it and keep on watering it and giving it sunshine, then it will soon wilt away and die. And again, I see appreciative inquiry as one of those nurturing tools that can really help, along with being reflective as well. So this is my final slide about the project, really. I found the hardest thing as a clinician going into this, who'd been in the NHS for a long time. It took me a while to develop my own appreciative antenna. I was a doer and I was a fixer. I loved problems. I loved solving them. I loved developing practice. And it took me a long time to change the way that I saw things, and also how I was going to change things as well and facilitate those changes. being an appreciative presence and being open and curious was really took a long time again to develop trust the team, and they saw me as a safe space in order to explore sometimes very vulnerable things. But by the end, they said they saw me and it kind of nudged them a bit like, oh, we're back in the appreciative zone. Claire's here. We're going to do appreciative things. And one laughingly said, we just need a cardboard cutout of you kind of standing in the corner once you've gone. So we just remember to do it more of the time. So again, there's something about figuring out how we nurture it and keep it going after the original flurry of activity has happened. I think the biggest thing for me is it doesn't have to be anything big, it doesn't have to be anything bold, it doesn't have to be any away days. Appreciating in the moment and having those real key conversations while your work is going on around you can be really effective and can lead to further reflection and deeper knowledge. But also, as Rachel said, it's really important that you're aware of the ward around you and have some situational awareness. And there were many times when I went on that ward and thought, now is not the time. They just need to get on and just do their work right now, and just respecting that as well. So what we wanted to do now was just spend 5 minutes really exploring some of those common learning that there was across both projects. And I'm just going to hand back to Rachel now to start us off.
Thank you. We'll go through these fairly fast because we'd like to leave time for questions, but you can always go back if you want more explanation. So, change of perspective. I remember doing an interview with a doctor. It was a humorous, very personal sharing, and it got interrupted. And that happened with several of them. So we agreed to meet in a day or two's time. When we sat down and started the interview, something went wrong. And suddenly we were going down this spiral, and she was talking about colleagues and burnout. And I was like desperately trying to sort of retrieve it, thinking, what happened? It's the same person. And I went back and looked at listened to the recording, and I realized that I'd mentioned burnout in the introduction, you know, something about the NHS, and she just latched onto that word. And it takes time to think about the words that you're using. It takes time and discipline not to start investigating all the terrible things that are happening. It's so ingrained in us. So it is about a commitment to keep learning and reflecting and improving. And Claire was my unofficial mentor, and it really helped because she could challenge me, and she had a deeper understanding of appreciative inquiry, and she helped me to have the courage to step away from the 4D process, in the sense that if I couldn't do it, it was okay, and that just asking one appreciative focus question was of value. Claire.
And I think we both found that believing in the process was really important. It feels like sometimes you're not getting anywhere. And I was always a bit hung up about action and generative change. But my supervisor said to me, just believe in the process, just keep on inquiring, keep on being curious, and that will definitely come. And it did. And I think the other skill, I think, is kind of taking off your professional hat. It's that human connection that's really important. And it's a willingness to be real and vulnerable in that appreciative inquiry, and being really, really authentic. It's not just a positive approach that you can use as a management style. It's much, much more than that. And then our second slide was around the potential of appreciative inquiry. And we found this in both of our projects. We felt it was a really lovely approach to readdress the balance of the NHS today. Rachel has talked to me about the Ockenden report for maternity care. My study really came out of the Francis report and the mid-staffs and Winterbourne-Stoke scandal as well. And it was around that real toxic environment that is talked about in both those reports, and how suddenly patient care can be unsafe because of dehumanizing approaches. So we felt it really was a space and an approach that helped healthcare workers to connect with their personal values, why they came into healthcare in the first place, and reconnect with what was really important to them in their work. And it was a real safe space and a restorative space, because they were talking about the things that they really value and really important to them.
Could I jump in there, Claire? Is that all right? Just in redressing the balance, I think, like the first example of the head of midwifery being crushed, just a little bit crushed inside with, something negative about her service. And I think that there is so much scrutiny, and there needs to be. It's a really important part of the NHS. But one of the midwives said, we ought to celebrate more. We ought to celebrate the amazing things that we do every day. And I think in any relationship, if we're in a relationship and we're passionate about it, we're investing a lot of our time and energy, but all we ever get back is what we did wrong. We didn't do this, we forgot to do that. It over a long period of time, that's really hard. So I saw the amazing effect of appreciative inquiry in redressing that balance and celebrating the great things that are happening. Sorry, Claire.
That's all right. I think I finished anyway, Rachel.
Okay. Yeah, so it validates and it builds on the good that's already happening. It's like it's hidden in plain sight. It happens every day. Someone makes us a cup of tea, maybe someone is kind to us, or we have a joke with someone, or so it's happening, but we don't talk about it. And it really helped people to be able to celebrate that. We had some great grassroots enthusiasm and problem solving. And I guess finally, I realized that being able to ask a question, feeling safe enough with your colleagues to ask a question if you weren't thinking very straight, and that's a safety issue, isn't it? And also staff retention. So many people cite issues with, management and relationships. But what I saw was the potential of colleagues. We talked about the fact that colleagues help with debriefing, they help with stress, they help with switching off at the end of the day. They help with developing your professional confidence if you've got someone that will just encourage and give a bit of feedback. So what we saw was the amazing potential of colleagues, and the contribution that makes to services in the NHS.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for listening. Any questions? Sorry, we've talked a lot.
This is where I jump in. So folks, if you used to come to those calls, you will know this already. But if you're new, on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a couple of buttons, chat and participant. There's one button called React, and if you click there, one of the options you see is called Raise Hand. So just to organize the order of things, so people don't have to jump in and negotiate cutting one another, please use the raise hand, and please do ask questions. This is a very special space, and we built for you. Grand, let's start. Katie, please.
Hi, yeah. Did you say Katie then? I don't want to speak over Lucy.
Oh, yeah, I did. Sorry, I was too soft.
No, that's fine. So me and my co-host collect stories from people about how they're seeking the good in our podcast, and time and time again when I'm working with fellow nurses or fellow healthcare professionals, you can see them go through this process of having to validate the trauma or the moral injury that they've witnessed before they're allowed to then speak about the good, because I think because of such a deficit-based structure that they've worked in, that's the only way they're allowed to speak about the good, is by validating first what things may have gone wrong in the past, or because that's what we continually monitor or measure. And I'm very interested in almost trauma-informed appreciative inquiry, especially with health and care, because there's so much complexity when you're approaching these individuals that not only are not asked on a regular basis what they are doing well, but also are regularly asked what's gone wrong. And we build structures to seek the harm. And I used to be a head of clinical governance, building these structures to seek the harm. And words create worlds. And when you seek the harm, you'll find the harm. So I know that Claire talked about not being slavishly positive. Was that an important part? Did you see any parts of those trends and themes with the individuals you worked in? I know you'd mentioned it briefly.
Yeah. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on it, being a healthcare worker myself, and kind of knowing the situations that people are working in. And I have seen positive approaches to management done before, and you just feel this is just a bit tokenistic. Yeah, right. Okay, you're just not really in the real world. And I didn't want to be like that, and that's why it was important to be authentic. I spent a lot of time reading about, now I can't remember who the authors are now because it was a while ago since I did the project, but there's quite a bit in the Appreciative Inquiry literature around recognising the shadow. And I'd used a lot of that as well. And I suppose it's reframing the conversation. So it can be starting with that, but then bringing it round to the appreciative elements towards the end. So it ends in a more generative place.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Lucy, please.
Oh, let me just lower my hand. So Rachel and Claire, sorry, losing my voice, but God, I'm just lapping it all up. It's amazing and really does resonate sort of where sort of my ideology and where I fit in, and how, being a nurse, we all come here to do a great job. So let's celebrate it, because we are great people and we do great things. So thank you. That's just amazing to listen to both of you. I suppose my question is, like, going forward in regards to, you were there doing your, asking the questions, etc. But how to keep that synergy, that energy, once you come away from that particular setting? Was it sort of self-perpetuating, as in people carried it on, but you've done such a powerful presence there, but how does that remain within the the units and the wards? So that's my question.
It's a very good question, and I was very mindful of that when we were doing the project, and that's why I think it's really important to bring other people along with you right from the word go. And really, if you're trying to find your feet with Appreciative Inquiry and work out how it's going to work within that team, bring others along well. And I probably had on each ward only a handful who were really dead engaged alongside me, and I would say they were just my buddy Appreciative Inquirers, and there were then others on the periphery who would come and tell me stories but not really want to take it any further than that. But there were others that were actively involved, and the ones that really got it, I would say we all had a bit of a change in ourself. We changed the way that we saw our world. And then you tend to just naturally start to use more Appreciative Inquiry in every aspect of your life. I even use it with my kids now. So it's just, you just use it everywhere once you really start to embed the approach in who you are as well. We did some dissemination wider as well. We did team, and I know you've done this as well, Rachel. You talked about presenting at governance meetings, didn't you? So definitely talk to the wider organisation, and I also did interviews with the chief nurse, the matrons, to make sure that I tried to include every level in the organisation when we were doing the study.
Yeah, no, that's really important. Sort of like the micro, as in where you're working, but also being able to disseminate that to the wider audience, in the hope that they will take that forward as well. So thank you.
I think if I could jump in, I think having the support of management definitely helped, because they gave a strong validation to the study, and would sort of do introductions, do feedback, reflect in even the clinical governance meeting at what was happening. And I was fortunate that just as I was leaving, a midwife was appointed as the sort of retention midwife, wellbeing and retention, I think. And so she was like, oh, you've sort of prepared the ground. And obviously, you know, I was able to give her some of the insights. I spent quite a lot of time with her. So, but I think it is the individuals that have seen it. And if I'm honest, I don't think many people in the unit would even know that I'd used appreciative inquiry. The focus really wasn't on this is the method that I'm using, but it was us just being human beings and talking and having those conversations about what's important to me and you, and sharing our vulnerability. So yeah, it's hard because you really want it to continue, and you just hope that it will go on growing in the people that have really got it. So
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Really useful. Thank you.
Folks, it's 10 past. I think we have time for one more question. Dun, dun. Christina, it's yours.
Thank you. I've been trying to get appreciative inquiry used within our morbidity mortality meetings. Certainly a colleague of mine does that in my own department. We're trying to look at that across the organisation. I just wondered any top tips or thoughts for us about, you know, you've got from your experience of how you might make that really work. I mean, we've certainly, a lot of the morbidity mortality meetings do focus a lot when things have gone wrong, because there's that thing that we have to look at, you know, we have to share the learning, that piece. And certainly my colleague is doing it. We try and put the cases we show within the 4D sort of process, and also trying to always find something that's gone well within a case. But it was just really striking me earlier then you were talking about the complaints and how you turn them around. And I guess there's a bit of skill learning how to do that, isn't it? I guess probably the more you do, the easier it gets. But I don't have any top tips for me around those.
When I was doing it with the ward sister, I think we were trying to just rephrase them in a different way. The key thing was, what's this person trying to tell us? What is it? What are they complaining about? What is it they want us to learn from it and to change? And then taking that intention and flipping it into more of a positive way of conveying that to the staff, because then the staff weren't getting defensive. They were like, oh, okay, yeah, I could probably do that. We can probably do something about monitoring how long bells are going for, and if it hasn't been ringing for ages and it's not my end of the ward, I'm just going to go and check that patient. So yeah, I think that was the key thing for us, really, with trying to understand what the intention behind the complaint was and what was it that they really wanted us to change, and then using that to flip the complaint over. We used the word flipping because that was just the easiest way for us to try and term it. The other thing is that I think it's Tamsin McBride. She's from the University of West of Scotland. I think it was Tamsin who did has published some papers. She worked with CQC inspectors, which is again quite another problem-focused negative investigation, isn't it? There may be some stuff in there that you'd want to look at. And so she worked with CQC inspectors about using an appreciative approach in inspecting care homes, I think it was.
Yeah, and Edel Roddy was involved in.
Oh, Adele. No, it was Adele. Yes. Yeah, that was right. Yeah.
Yeah, she's written, I think that was her PhD. So you can find that work if you look up.
We were doing our PhD at the same time. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christina,
thank you very much.
Oh, there you go. I saw you say thank you, but I could hear it. Well, folks, we have 2 minutes, so just so the last question is not mega rushed. I feel like it's time to wrap up right now. Just as always, I'm gonna ask the speakers of today's call to send the slides and all the materials that were relevant to the conversation here, and we're gonna forward to you if you press the button to get a follow-up email. And we always have the group if you have any extra questions, or if you'd like to explore something more, if you're missing some document, just let us know over there. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Rachel, Claire, and Suzanne for this call. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope to see everybody again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd just like to add my thanks to Yuriam. You know, such a great description of all the nuances, the micro and the bigger picture. You did it beautifully, both of you. Really inspiring. Thank you for being
Thank you, Suzanne.
such dedicated practitioners. Yeah, and sharing it.
Thank you.
All right, let me stop this recording.